Charles Webb is asking, doesn't Florida still produce the second most NFL players to California? So anybody that follows college football, high school football, the NFL to some degree, those three understands where the talent is. I will do a little digging for you, Charles, but we know that Florida, California, and Texas produce the best and the most college football players. It would reason to believe that they would produce the most. Now, if you're going to compare a ratio versus the population, then you start to dive into the deep south with the Louisianas and others. There's one, so on a Google search, I pulled this up according to Saturday Down South as of September 18, which is a year and a half ago, but those numbers, it's not going to fluctuate much. Louisiana, and I've heard this many times, has the best ratio. Now, of course, because of population, they don't have the sheer numbers.
Right.
But one out of every 76,000 people in Louisiana turn out to be an NFL player, followed by Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and South Carolina. But again, if we're talking about sheer population, understand, I don't know what the population of Florida is, but I saw that the population of California is pushing like 41 or 42 million. So obviously it's going to be difficult for them to keep it up in regards to a ratio, but if I've got the chance, depending on what goes on in the live chat, we'll continue to dig. Got Cam Underwood on here from State of the U talking Miami football. Want to remind everyone that we've got a call-in show every Sunday night. Call me up directly, talk college football every Sunday night here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, 10 p.m. Eastern time. As of the opening day rosters of the 2017 NFL season. Again, we gave you a ratio of Louisiana doing extremely well. When you talk sheer numbers, and again, this is going to be 3 years old when the NFL opens up play in 2020, but still, it's got to be somewhat close. Florida had the most players in the NFL hailing from the state of Florida as high school players, 212, followed by California, 191, Texas, 179, Georgia, 120, Ohio, 82. Those were the top five. No big surprise there.
Not at
all. Yeah. Florida, California, Texas, the deep south then would be the next tier. Then Ohio and Pennsylvania, Rust Belt states, not losing population, but staying even. So losing ground would have been more significant in the 70s and 80s, but still the best of the North or Midwest. That's pretty much what you got. I did the numbers myself on this one, so I'm off by one or two. People cut me a bit of a break. It's not, we're not talking about a deep dive of ratios and percentages, just sheer numbers. Went through the first three rounds of the NFL draft. This is what I came up with. I think there's basically, Cam, a thought out there, and I would be one of many that think like this, that the SEC obviously dominated the sport, at least from 2006 through 2013's national championship from Florida State. They won all those national championships. And that's not the only determinant, but for the non-thinking fan, that was the only determinant. But even if you did the deep dive, the SEC was dominant. Were they as dominant as most people thought? I don't think so. I certainly poked holes in it at the time, but they were the best. Then I think they were still the best based on two measurements we're talking about here, recruiting and then the production 3 to 4 years later into the NFL draft. But the winning on the field has certainly, I would still say, been the best in the last 5 or 6 years overall. But there's been headway made by the Big Ten and some other conferences at times. The ACC had a really good season about 3 to 4 years ago, 2016, I believe. And again, the Big Ten with Penn State, Michigan, and some others getting better behind Ohio State. But in the first three rounds of the NFL draft, wow, maybe the SEC is just as good, if not better, than it's been, with 40 players taken. The Big Ten 17, the Big 12 12, the Pac-12 10, the ACC 8.
So 40 out of 106 is 37.8 or 37.7% of the picks in the top three rounds from that one conference. You know, but usually. then again, Miami's roster is littered with guys that SEC teams wanted. So then why is, I mean, the ACC Coastal Division had one player picked in the first 3 rounds, and that was Dalton Keene from Virginia Tech, who had 17 touchdowns against Miami this past year. End list. But again, I can go down and look at all of this roster and see, we beat Florida State, Florida, Georgia, Alabama for some guys. You know what I mean? It's up and down the roster. But you're not doing anything with it. And my good friend Steve Feinberg just tweeted it out. He said, there's basically 3 reasons. 1, the guys are not getting drafted. 1, they left too early. 2, they were not developed appropriately. 3, maybe their talent just wasn't as good as we thought.
You understand the sheer volume of the numbers being accurate in regards to 5 and 4 stars, then 3 and 4 years later becoming the bulk of the NFL rosters. But to the development point, you see, even in watching the profiles of the NFL players as they're drafted, and the Kuipers and the McShays, hopefully he's doing well in past years, break these guys down, and you learn about their high school recruitment. You find out, okay, well, this guy was missed, and this guy was, or he just wasn't very good in high school, and he was developed by said school, Wisconsin, Iowa, whomever. They were a 2-star, and it's not infrequent. It's not the bulk. The bulk's the 70% that go to the NFL, but there's a nice pocket of 30%, and I'm just throwing around numbers that are probably within the ballpark, of guys that were developed that you would not think were NFL players when they left high school.
And look, guys get bigger. J.J. Watt grew 6 inches and gained 70 pounds of lean muscle. It mostly happens, but in that kind of a way. Khalil Mack was the same kind of thing coming out of Fort Pierce Westwood. Wanted to be, stay somewhere in the state of Florida, but went to Buffalo as a 2-star recruit. And then, he grew 3 inches and gained 55 pounds of lean muscle. Bro, so you're going to see a lot of that. Dirty Noel was talking about that, Miami has not had a high pick recently. Miami has not had a high pick in the last 2 years. And yes, we know, you don't hit on everybody. You don't develop everybody. And go back 2 weeks ago to the conversation that Mark and I had, and the wholesome one, about Clemson, about how they hit at every level, recruiting, development, performance. That leads to high draft picks. Miami's hit on a couple areas with some people, but if you don't have the physical stature, so you hit on recruiting with Jaquan Johnson, the franchise, 4-time first team all Dade County in high school, which is unheard of. Jaquan Johnson is still 5'10", 193 pounds when he goes to the draft, though. It's a safety. You know what I mean? He developed. He plays really well. He's going to make it. He's going to be on an NFL roster for a long time. But there are still those measurable things that are not to the top level. And sometimes that happens. It just does. And it's the thing, if you talk about recruiting, or if I were to make the analogy to culinary pursuits, we're getting gourmet ingredients, but we're making bargain basement budget food with it. Oh, I burned the cheese on this. Oh, I didn't do, it's just I got this great foie gras and truffle this and Wagyu beef, and I got all these great ingredients, but if I'm just going to make sloppy joes with it, is it really doing a great thing? And I think that we're seeing a lot of that with the players on this roster. And, even it's bad because, you're even affecting the defensive players because of the failings of the offense recently. Guys like Jonathan Garvin, you couldn't tell me in 2017 as a freshman or 18 as a sophomore. You can tell me after those seasons that he wasn't going to go in the top 3 rounds. You know what I mean? And then, last year happens, and then, his numbers were depressed a little bit. We talked about why those numbers went down a little bit. But you have guys whose numbers fall because they're getting extra attention. They still get drafted highly, but what happened there, So there are many issues. I'm not trying to sit here and say that there are not. But the issue on talent is one that I'm going to push back on. Because if everybody wants these guys, including Florida State, you know what I mean? Including Florida, including all these other teams. So, I get you, the Noel guy who said that. Miami has on their roster a lot of guys that you wanted. Fact. On your roster, there's guys that Miami wanted. Also fact. I'm not saying it's only a one-way street, but we cannot play the result and then rewrite or be revisionist history on the process. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just say, okay, well, this guy wasn't a first-round draft pick, or it wasn't a third round or top 3-round draft pick. So DJ Dallas had no value coming out as a recruit. Like, that's not how things work. It's in the interim where you say, okay, what are you doing? Where's the failing on getting them to this level to move forward, not impugning them in their abilities as coming in, if that makes sense.
Also understand, people, that the draft is not the end all be all. It's huge. It's a lot. Most of the impact players in the NFL certainly were drafted, but I ran the numbers. And again, this was a few years ago. We talked about it on here, I'm sure, of free agents that make NFL rosters and then contribute, start on down the line. So just because a guy, there's going to be all sorts of eyebrows lifted after the draft today to say, why wasn't this guy drafted and that guy drafted? There were a few flaws and question marks in his game, plus just the need for different teams didn't line up. But he is then he's getting 14 phone calls out of the 32 teams of camps that he's invited to. So there's still interest there, and he'll be able to go in there and fight for a job.
Yeah, but there is also a difference for fighting for a job versus being a guy who's drafted highly enough where you have a job secured. So
yeah, absolutely.